All right. Today, my special guest is an Olympic gold and silver medalist, skippered an America's Cup team twice in the last two Cups, is the current skipper of Team Japan in the SailGP, and has won 2 Moth World Championships and multiple other World Championships. Basically, this man is the best sailor in the world. Give him a boat and he's better than you. So welcome, Nathan Outteridge.
Thanks, mate. That's quite an introduction.
Yeah,
who are arguing some of those points.
Yeah, well, it leads me into my next question. So if you're the best sailor in the world, who's number 2?
Oh, Tom would have to be number 2, right?
Oh, I like it. I hope he watches this. This will be very good. So he may be one of my special guest questions coming up later. So, yeah, we've got a few topics we're going to run through. SailGP, obviously, America's Cup, NACRA 17 and 49er, where the Olympic route, and then Moths, and then a little bit of future. So we'll jump straight into it with SailGP. You're the skipper of Team Japan. How come you didn't skip at Team Australia?
Very long story. I can shorten it quite quickly. Initially, when SailGP was getting all set up, I was signed with Artemis at that point to do the Cup, and then Artemis were thinking about doing SailGP. And that was before there was any real strong nationality kind of ties with SailGP. And at that point, Russell and Tom Slingsby had done the deal to Tom to do the Australian team. So when Artemis sort of fell through, Australia was already taken, and Russell came to me and offered the Japanese team. And I said, oh, well, that sounds like a cool prospect to me. So I'd love to be representing Australia and being on that boat, but you can't have 2 people, driving one boat. So it is what it is.
It is fair enough. But I mean, the team's changed a bit from last year to this year. Last year you had your good mates of Parko and Goobs on there, and now you've got a few others. Aidan Menzies is now on there with you, so another long-time friend, and a few other boys have swapped spots. So bit different this year, bit harder.
A bit harder, yeah. Sydney was definitely tougher. The Japanese team is about developing, sailing talent in Japan. And, my goal really is to drive the boat, to make it go as fast as it can and to race and to win. But at the same time, training up, the Japanese talent to eventually take over the team. And so, that was sort of the instructions I had from Russell with the team. CEO, get the team up and running, establish it, make it a top competitive team, and then kind of move on at some point down the track. So, it made a lot of sense to get Goobs and Parko in straight away, just with the amount of time we've done together. Goobs and I, all the 49er stuff, but Parko also heavily involved with Artemis for the Bermuda campaign. So it was a pretty turnkey operation for us last year. And last year we spent a lot of time, gathering the information. We had Emmett Lazic coaching us, who, I've worked with for all my 49er Olympics, and basically documented as much as we could about what it takes to sail these boats at a high level. And, with our Japanese sailing team members, we were just trying to educate them throughout last year, and then giving them the opportunity, for this year, basically for the Sydney event and the rest of this season. Aidan Menzies, was in our team last year as one of the shore team members. He was looking after the wing program because, Goobs was coming in pretty late often with his, commitments with Ineos. And so he was basically the spare wing trimmer, reserve for last year, with the plan to put him on the wing for this year as we transition to more and more Japanese sailors on board. We always knew that Goobs and Parker were on a 1-year deal with us, and they were going to go and fulfill their America's Cup duties with Ben once the season ended. What we didn't realize was that Ben was plotting a plan in the background to come and join SailGP. So effectively everything that Goobs and Parker learnt with the Japanese team last year, carried straight over to Ineos. So that meant that we were really training up one of our future rivals, and Goobs and Parker had no idea that was happening either. I think Ben probably saw how good the racing was last year and said, I want to be a part of that, and was very fortunate to get Goobs and Parker on his team for the Sydney event.
I must admit the SailGP is an amazing concept, and you can see it's got legs. I just hope there's enough money around to keep it going because, obviously tough times at the moment. So,
yes, not easy financially at the moment. For the teams, we had quite a lot of good leads of potential sponsors out of the Sydney event, and then as soon as COVID strikes the whole world and everything comes to a grinding halt, everyone's quite hesitant now to invest. The good news is that I know Larry is committed to the event and the circuit, so the event's going to go ahead, for seasons to come. But we really need to try and get some commercial interest and support. That's just very difficult to do in this kind of climate. And for us, particularly now that the Olympics has been pushed back 1 year in Japan, we were hoping to get an event there in 21, and with the Olympics still on and a lot of the money, tied up in Olympics, it's really hard to get that to work for an event in Tokyo or Yokohama or something like that. So it's not impossible. It just means we've got an additional challenge ahead of us, not just competition on the water, but financially it's a challenge. And, I think all sport around the world is going to be facing the same thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, as you said before with Larry, the man should be given a gold medal for what he's done for sailing, and same as Russell. I mean, especially development sailing and foiling. Like, look where it's come to in the last, not even 10 years. Sailing has gone a long way in the last 10.
You're spot on. Like, what Larry's done with his deep pockets for the sport and, progressing, the technology, giving a lot of us, a huge boost to the industry, whether you're a boat builder or a sail maker or a designer or a control software engineer or a sailor or, management, you've all benefited in some way, shape or form for Larry's commitment to the sport. And, Larry's not the only one. There's plenty of other, I guess, wealthy individuals who have a passion for our sport, and we're going to probably be relying on them quite heavily, over the next couple of years to keep the sport going. And it's probably an opportunity to try and advance it. If they're not as affected as much as, say, a lot of the corporate sponsorship, then, it might be able to shine a bit of a limelight on our sport that we might not have been able to do because other sports might be struggling more than us. So he's hoping.
Yeah, look, 2019 with the SailGP team, you guys, I mean, Tom won fair and square, but I think you guys had some pretty unlucky spots there. Like, you would dominate regattas and then just not finish it off, and especially like San Francisco and even France. So
it was a good battle between us and the Australians. Like Tom and his guys. It was really close every sort of race we went to, and he got the better of us 4 out of 5 occasions. On paper, and I think, if you ask Tom, I'm sure he would probably say it was a little bit closer than that. But when the pressure came and it counted in that one race in Marseille, he just kept applying the pressure the whole race. And, we thought that we were going to be able to hang on to it the whole way around. But, it's just one small error in one small jibe, which becomes a very important jibe in a race. And he makes the pass and there's $1 million and series won. So, and what's a bit tough for us as a team is we knew we were going to lose 2 of our key sailors. So that was going to make it quite hard for the next season. Can you hear those birds okay?
I can hear those birds. They're chirping away. I think you're in a lovely spot of the world. So, well, you make it hard for all Australians. You question our loyalty to whether the Australian boat or the or jump on the Japanese, because it was fairly Australia 2 there. So anyway, we'll move on to the next one. Is SailGP versus the Cup boats, because clearly you've had experience in both. Talk us through like the differences.
You mean the ones that we raced in Bermuda? Like what's changed?
Yeah. So America's Cup 50s versus SailGP 50s. Yeah.
So there's a few fundamental things changed. Like the wings were they were the same wings, like they just got rebranded. Same with the hulls, but the biggest change was the appendages. So the foils and rudders, they were all brand new designs. And basically what the designers did for SailGP is they looked at all the designs that all the teams had in Bermuda. and said, you know, what's the best of all the different designs? So they took the Team New Zealand kind of quite open angle, quite, you know, higher spec kind of foil, and said, okay, well, that was, you know, obviously a huge feature to why they won. Then they said, well, what else can we do to improve that foil? Well, they said, well, we'll make them all one design, so, you know, we can make them quite robust. So they've done a really good job on the trailing edges down the back, so they don't get as much damage. So maintenance is quite good. They also push the riding moment, so they put the elbow, you know, the lowest, most wide part of the foil, 0.5 meter outboard to leeward. So effectively the boat's 0.5 meter wider, so instantly your power to weight ratio goes up, so the boat will go faster. And so that was a big performance gain. And then the same with the rudders. They went to a like a steel shaft at the bottom, which meant that it could be much thinner to reduce drag. And probably one of the biggest things they did is in Bermuda, we had 3 degrees of rudder differential, and we're now able to get 7 degrees of rudder differential. So that just basically means you can generate more power through more riding moment. So that's why we can generate such high speeds in not a whole lot of wind. You know, 12 knots these days, you're easily doing 40. Whereas in Bermuda, you had to wait till about 18 knots to start getting those kind of speeds. So that's kind of one of the biggest, you know, straight line performance gains. And with the rudder differential, which not everyone probably is aware of, is you've got what we call a diff limiter. So when you get to a certain speed, the computer system starts dropping the differential out. And that's purely to stop the boat breaking. You know, you think about, we did a lot of testing and I was involved in it here, trying to generate as much downforce as you can. But once you get over about a ton of downforce on that rudder, you start coming into structural problems, whether it's how the horizontal's attached to the rudder vertical or how it's located in the actual rudder bearings itself. So we did all these calculations and said, well, once you hit, I think it's 37 knots, you're at a ton of downforce. So as you go faster, we have to reduce the rudder differential to stop the downforce just going up and up and up to the point where something breaks. So that's quite a cool little feature. But what it means is that you can generate heaps of speed in very little wind, and then you kind of get to a cliff, and then all of a sudden, to maintain structural integrity, you've got to, you know, you can't just keep accelerating. The boat would definitely go faster if you kept it at 7 degrees diff, but basically once we're doing 45 knots, you're down to the 4 or 3 degrees of diff again. And the other big reason for that is safety. If you happen to pop that windward rudder out of the water, which we've seen a few teams do, when it pops out, if you lose a ton of downforce, it's like 10 people just jumping off, you know, in a split second. So the thing not only does it nosedive, but it also tips over sideways very quickly too. So that's kind of some of the main changes there. And then the other big change is just how the boats are powered. You know, we had 4 grinders grinding flat out to power the boats in Bermuda. Now we've got batteries on the boat, which effectively power everything. And all the grinders do is spin the winch. So not saying it's an easy job for the grinders, but it now means that we can tack and jibe pretty much whenever we want safely, and it opens up your tactical, you know, options around the course. And I was having a chat to Ben about this when we got to Sydney, and I said, you know, what do you think? He said, it's just amazing that you can go where you want to go now and do what you want to do, and you can just tack and jibe, you know, 20 seconds apart, whereas that was just never an option in Bermuda. So that's been a huge upgrade for the racing. You know, it doesn't affect the performance too much, but it definitely means you can race the boats properly.
Are the boats easier to sail than they were because of these developments?
Well, the foils are way more unstable than what we had, say, at Artemis. And when I first was commissioning the boats at the end of 2018, it was really difficult to sail, like really difficult. And my first bit of feedback was, I don't know how all the new sailors are going to do this, because it was quite difficult. And we had a guy called Jonathan Nicholas, who was part of the Artemis Technologies group, working on the control systems for us in Bermuda, but also for these boats. And we spent a lot of time improving the control system. So there's a lot of inbuilt aided software helping the flight controllers. So it's not as simple like you turn the dial and it moves exactly. There's some computer calculations going in there to help, with the stability of the boat. For example, when you move the dagger board, if you only move the dagger board, you start a pitch oscillation in the boat. So what it does is it actually moves the rudders a tiny bit at the same time as when you move the dagger board to counteract that pitch oscillation. So imagine sailing your Moth, right, and the wand's flicking back and forward, so the boat's kind of going like this. If you were able to get the rudder just to move in sync at the same moment, then the boat's just moving vertically up and down and not pitching all over the place. So that meant that all of a sudden the boat became, as easy to sail as what we had in Bermuda. And, by the time we finished that kind of development over that summer, commissioning period, the guys were jumping in and sailing the boat straight off the bat, no problems. And so I was a bit nervous about how difficult it was going to be, but once they got a lot of the control system stuff sorted, because there was no rule, right, that said you can't do any, that the rule hadn't been created, you could really benefit from what's been learnt with various types of autopilots. And so it's not 100% autopilot, but there's definitely a lot of computer assistance going on.
And the new wings that were meant to come on this year, I think a couple of teams got them for round one, and then everyone was getting them from San Francisco onwards. Have they made a difference?
So I've not used one, but I've spoken to TJ, Tom Johnson, who sailed with the Danish team, also Paul Campbell-James, who was involved in the commissioning, and they both said that it's significantly easy to use. So the fundamental difference is, that wing was effectively the same area as what we all had, but it's how it's controlled. So, all the current wings have got ropes and chains and cables, and it's all very mechanical. So there's a cylinder that adjusts something, but then you've got line stretch, and it's just not quite that direct. Whereas all the new wings have little actuators at all the different control points up the wing. And you can tune it all in the shed perfectly because you're not worried about stretch on cables and things like that. So what it basically means is that your twist control function now is really accurate. And they were saying that, they could almost not use the wing sheet and just use the twist lever beside them and adjust the flaps. And, you've obviously said ACATs quite a lot. Imagine trimming only the Traveller with the main sheet cleated, which is kind of how you've got to do it with the old wings, because the way that the twist works is not very accurate. But as soon as you can control the flaps, and I've had a few chats to Glennie Ashby, and he said, that was key for them. They, on Team New Zealand, were playing the flaps quite a lot and the sheet very little. And so once you make that shift, I think the boat becomes much more balanced in its flight control, because every time you rotate the whole wing, that front E1, every time you ease it, it's a big handbrake, and every time you ease it, the bow lifts, and every time you pull the sheet back on, the bows drop. Whereas if you're just doing small adjustments on the flap, the boat stays in trim better. So, I was really excited to get it in San Fran. We're gonna have to wait a bit longer now.
So you're nearly inverting the top panel?
Yep, you're definitely inverting the top panel. We've got capabilities of inverting it up to 10 degrees. I think the new wings go even further than that. I think you can get I think they said it was about 60 degrees of twist from top to bottom.
Wow.
Whereas, the current wings, the Gen 1 wings were probably in the 45 kind of range. So you imagine, upwind, your standard camber angle's around 25, and you normally will run about -5, sometimes -10 in the head. And obviously the more twist you run, the faster the thing will go. But if you start inverting, you go, okay, there's a drag penalty because it's like a handbrake to leeward, but then you actually get riding moment from it. And that's where the gain comes from. So, in catamarans like Nacras and A-class, if you could have the ability to really control your sail and invert their head, they would take off as well, go way faster.
Yeah, I have had the opportunity to speak to a couple of boys that tested the new rigs, and even the short one when they went out in some big breezes, and they said the speed, the top speed is definitely going to get broken with the new wings. That's for sure.
Yeah, smaller wing, like, all sailing or windsurfing, as soon as it gets windy, if you down sail area, you can harness more of that power without the drag. So upwind speed is going to go through the roof, I think, with the small wing. Reaching will go through the roof. Downwind, you've kind of got the drag of your foil. So there's a limit to how fast you can go. But I think everyone was excited to get to San Fran and start pushing through 50 knots once again.
Very good. We're on to a special guest question, and this guy's written into me from New South Wales. It's a T. Slingsby, and he asks the question: is it true that you got injured on your Bucks night? Is that a true story?
True story. As everyone who has ever had a Bucks night knows, I had a very interesting chat with my wife, Emma. The whole point of a guy's Bucks night is to see how much pain you can put on that human being. And it's a real test for the wife, or the soon-to-be wife, to see if they still want this person in their darkest moment. Whereas a female's, hens do, is girls saying how much they love their friend and basically they're looked after the whole time. So yeah, I got pretty stitched up by Tom and Goobs and all my closest friends.
Yeah, that's the toughest question I had to ask here. I had to try and keep it as PG as possible. There's a few others that got pushed through to me from a few other people that I said, I just can't ask that question. So
I'm surprised Randy Cunningham didn't ask you a question.
He might be coming up.
Oh, it's hard to avoid that guy.
Okay, let's move on to America's Cup. 2 cups, both with the same team, Artemis, 2 different boats, AC 72. Was it 72? Yeah, 72, and then the AC 50. Got thrown straight in there as the skipper. It's a fairly big jump, go from a 49er Olympic gold into skippering an America's Cup team and all the pressure that comes with it. Like, how'd you handle that?
Well, I guess my initial exposure to Artemis was really as a reserve sailor. I got asked to be a part of the Artemis program straight after the London Olympics. And, I knew Ian Percy fairly well, and I knew that, he'd just come from the Olympics too. So sort of leaned on him for a bit of help and guidance in that program. And I started off there, I think, in October 2012. And they hadn't launched the boat at this point in time. And then, about a month or so into sort of sailing, I was basically in the chase boat every day, just watching, seeing how it was going, sitting in the sailing team meetings and design meetings, just listening to how it all goes. And I think that's, the best way you can really engross yourself in a team is listen and try and work out what's going on rather than come in and talk too much. And I just remember watching it all sort of unfolding. And at the same time, Artemis also hired Loic Perron, who's a bit of a multi-hull legend. And he was also, the consultant sailor. He did a bit of time driving the boat. But, Terry Hutchinson was the skipper at the time. And he was driving the boat most days. And I remember sometime around November, I got the word, Terry's leaving. He's not going to be a part of the team anymore. And I'm like, well, didn't really know what that meant, but I didn't know if it was he was leaving or the team was getting rid of him. Either way, at the end of the day, basically, Paul Caird and Ian Percy said, well, Nathan, you're going to have to learn how to drive this boat pretty soon. And I was like, obviously really excited, but, it came as a bit of a surprise. My expectation was just to be a part of the team and to help where I could. It's a 100-person team, and I'm used to being involved in a 3 or 4 person kind of team. Loic took over a fair bit of the driving duties and gave me a few opportunities to drive the boat. And it probably wasn't really until the team shifted from the red catamaran, which wasn't a foiling boat, to our 45 foiling boat and the blue boat that I could really add a lot of value, I think, coming from a foiling background. And it was a cool experience, but it was a bit of a tough introduction with a boat being off the pace, having the tragedy of losing our friend Bart, and just trying to rebuild a team. So not your ideal introduction, but man, I learned a lot from it. It was a really good experience, but a bit heartbreaking at the same time.
And then going into the second cup, where pretty much everyone was on a level playing field. If you could say that everyone had the same sort of platform, you could have slightly different versions of wings or controls and wings and stuff like that. How'd you go into that next one? Because you were starting out kind of equal to everyone else.
Yeah, well, there was still quite a lot of design space, a bit of scope there. You know, we had obviously one design hulls, beams, wings, jibs, but your appendages and your control systems were the area of focus. And, you know, Artemis kicked off pretty quickly. You know, we went straight into modifying one of our AC-45s, making it what we called the turbo. And that was quite good. We did a lot of sailing with Oracle in San Francisco and then again in Bermuda. And our whole goal was incremental gains. You know, we thought that there was a massive, you know, revolution with the 72s, and then it was going to be incremental gains from there on with the smaller boats. And so, you know, we just set off on a path of trying to we started a lot against Oracle and Japan and Bermuda. It was all about foil development, control systems. We do a lot of in-house racing with those guys. And, you know, come the event, we thought we were in really good shape. But the outlier for us was New Zealand. We had no idea how they were going to stack up against the fleet. Obviously, I think, you know, the French and Ben, when they showed up, were a little bit off the pace. And Ben did a great job with his team to really get on the pace, you know, come racing. But Team New Zealand were clearly just that step ahead of everyone in lots of different areas. And so it was a really enjoyable campaign. And you know, we felt like from the campaign we had before, where we were off the pace in so many different areas, to challenge and to match the defenders and beat the defenders in the 2-round robin races that we did against them, what was massive. I think what we sort of underestimated was how strong the New Zealanders were going to be. And, you know, we had some great racing with them, and few things had have gone our way, and they had have had, you know, some issues, we would have been in that final. But you know, it was quite cool to be a part of it. And honestly, living in Bermuda was probably one of the best parts about the whole thing. It was a pretty nice place to live and go sailing on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, the takeaways is probably the second best team there. Had it been the two best teams got to go in the cup, you would have been there, I would have thought. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of how we felt. And, you know, our debrief sort of lent ourselves to that. I think, you know, our control system in the end was very good on board. Our racing and decision making was quite solid, but Team New Zealand had these foils that had a bit less drag than us. So downwind and reaching, we thought that we were on par or sometimes quicker, but upwind, their higher spec foils just meant that they could go same speed and higher. And you know, when, you know, there's 2 upwinds and 2 downwinds, the upwinds take longer, so they eventually grind you down. So we could generally lead for the first half of that race, but eventually, you know, the pressure of them coming at you faster was quite tough. And I think also, you know, their handling with the way that they set up the boat, with Blair flying it and Pete being able to look around a lot more, just gave them a bit more tactical options. I was really focused on flying the boat. Purse was really focused on grinding a lot of the time. So the two of us trying to communicate tactical stuff a lot of it was mapped out before the race began, and it was, you know, sort of do what you can during the racing, but it was really hard to turn your head around as much as what Pete was doing. And I've you know, found when we were in the 50s with SailGP, all of a sudden, with someone flying the boat for me, I now feel how Pete was quite different. You got some action in the background there.
I've just come under attack. Yeah, I mean, and you also said earlier, versus the having that power to be able to tack and jibe. Team New Zealand seem to have that much more than any other team. I think in that coming from the leg power.
Yeah, I think they were able to generate a bit more power. I think you'd be kidding yourself to think that legs aren't stronger than arms. And and one of the other cool features that they had that no one else had was, because they were on the hydraulic wing sheet, they could basically tack and jibe without anyone needing to cross sides. You know, we always had to send goobs across to grab that sheet so that it didn't fly across. So you saw later on they were doing, no look tacks and no look jibes, and that's quite a cool weapon to have in your arsenal that we didn't have. So I don't think we ever really got to push them to the point where they had to use it, but I know they used it eventually against Oracle in that final race to roll them in a jibe. So they just were, Team New Zealand is a team that has been through multiple campaigns, so they've got all their systems in place, and Artemis had a big build phase throughout the San Francisco Cup, was starting to refine things in Bermuda, and when that cup ended, we had all the pieces in the puzzle to really go one step further. And unfortunately, the boat changed, the rule changed, the venue changed, and the guy funding our team, Torbjorn Tornquist, decided it's not really for him anymore, and it all sort of fell by the wayside. So, I feel like I speak to Ian Percy a bit lately, and a few of the other key team members, and we all feel like we've got a bit of unfinished business, and we'd love another opportunity to get back involved and get the band back together. But it's not possible right now, but you just never know what's down the track.
Well, that leads into my next question, future cup sailing for you. Like there was rumours going around that you were going to be sailing as the understudy for Team New Zealand, but that got quickly squashed.
I've had many people tell me that, and they're like, "Oh, come on, you can tell me, like you are with them much," and I'm like, just because I live in Auckland doesn't mean that. Oh, but you've made the day count. Yes, I might have been in the country for long enough to make a day count, but no, nothing like that's happening. I would love nothing more than to have a sail on one of those boats. I think they're quite cool looking boats. I being living in Auckland, you see the boat out quite a bit. I've seen that they've recently launched the big boat again after its long trip around the world for no events. But they've been out on their little boat quite a bit too, and the little boat looks quite sporty. I'm good mates with Glenn Ashby, and so I never press him for private information, but I send him a cheeky text when I see them out on the water and either doing something cool, or I see them towing home from a long way out. I'm like, oh, you must have broke something today. But the cool thing about the Cup is you're on the inside of all this information, and I guess that's what I'm missing, and a lot of other people who aren't in at this cycle are missing, is that as an outsider to the Cup, you just love the sport and the boats are cool, and you just want to really know what's happening and what are the latest developments in our sport. And if you're not privy to that information, you're just on the outside sort of watching. And so I did that for a long period of time, doing Olympic sailing, wondering what was going on in the Cup, got a chance to get on the inside and on the outside again this time. So I'm sure it's all going to be pretty exciting when the teams get here to Auckland and they all start sailing. But, for now, obviously my focus is with the SailGP squad, and, that's quite cool as well. There's plenty of development happening within SailGP for next season. One of the goals is to try and make the boats, continually upgrading while maintaining a one design racing style.
You like the new Cup boats? What do you think of them?
I like them, but I think they're a complete harangue. Like there is so much involved in lifting those things. Like you still got to crane them in out of the water every day because they're so complicated. You just can't leave them in the water, which means you still got to pull the mast out every day. And, it sounds like they take way longer to get in and out of the water on a daily basis than what the catamarans did. And to me, it just looks a lot like the 72. Like they're groundbreaking technology at the moment, and they're not at all into refinements. They're all about what is the concept? Can we make the concept work? Are we going to get a chance to refine it? No, we just got to build a second boat, and it's quite a big exercise. I think had they be, round 2 of those boats, if they keep them the same, that's when it's going to start to get really cool because you'll be optimizing them a lot. Or if they decide, look, let's just go a bit smaller because you don't need to be so big to go so fast. Like I understand that Team New Zealand's little boat you could race it against the big boat and it would be kind of a race. It's not as if bigger is faster these days. I've seen the thing sailing around and it's pretty maneuverable. I'm impressed with how well the thing tacks. how well it jibes. They're doing dry laps all the time, and you know, not sure how much fun it would be to be a grinder on one of those boats. You got everyone below deck sort of turning handles and 3 people sailing the boats again. So it's effectively the same as what we sort of had in Bermuda, just a lot of grinding. And I don't expect we're going to see people hoisting and dropping code zeros in the middle of races like, you know, it was originally planned maybe within the rules.
No, I agree with that one. All right, well, let's get away from the Cup and go into more the Olympic and off-the-beach boats. So you've just come off a NACRA 17 campaign where you got agonisingly close to being selected.
Yep.
Believe that one there. And the 49er where you went to 3 Olympics, were close to 1 gold in the last race of China, but again, just fell over, and then smashed 2012, just dominated. Probably the whole cycle really dominated. And then the silver with Rio. Again, from an outside, it looks like you're a little bit distracted with Cup life to be able to really commit to a 49er campaign, which probably gave Bear and Pete the upper hand. Is that how you feel the campaign went a little bit?
It's probably very fair to say that, like, you know, I'll take a couple of steps back. Obviously, China was disappointing not to get a gold medal, or actually any medal at the end of the day. You know, I wouldn't have said we were favourites in any way, but we were definitely contenders. And, you know, that one I feel slipped away from Ben and myself. And when something slips away from your grasp, you get very motivated to not let it happen again. So it was a full rebuild, you know, for me in terms of how I wanted to sort of approach things, and getting back sailing with Goobs, who was a long time friend, and it was, you know, a very good campaign we put together for 4 years. As you said, we dominated quite heavily, particularly in the events we really were focused on, which was all the World Championships and the events in Weymouth. And so for us, that was our number one focus, and everything else in sailing and life was sort of secondary and to assist that. And when you can apply yourself with such level of detail, it's amazing what you can achieve. I think when it came around to doing Rio again, Goobs and I kind of made, I guess maybe naively, the assumption that we would just go around again and we'd like to go and defend our gold medal. And the way that we operated in the London quad, we would just apply ourselves to do the same again. And we all know that, you know, in sport, you've got to up it every time. You know, like if you just say, well, this is what worked for us last time, we'll do the same again, you're not going to get the same result, because someone else is going to, you know, sort of leapfrog you. Add on top of that a full-time America's Cup job that was based on the other side of the world. You know, we had a base set up in San Fran, a base set up in Bermuda. We were trying to train in the 49er back in Australia, with the 49er events around the world, plus the World Series that we were competing in. It was an extremely busy period, and, you know, there's no way you can say that we were dedicating as much time, quality time, to the 49er sailing as we would have liked to. Meanwhile, Pete and Blair were in Team New Zealand, based in Auckland, training in their 49er based in Auckland, and really hungry to go from a silver to a gold. So they probably had much higher motivation than we did. And, you know, Team New Zealand probably weren't asking as much of them as what, say, Artemis were asking of Goobs and myself, because I know, you know, Glenn and Ray and a bunch of the older senior guys in the team were really sort of leading a lot of that design process. Pete and Blair kind of had the luxury to sort of come and go a bit more. You know, I think their primary goal was Olympics, knowing that the Cup would be 6 months down the track. Whereas Goobs and I were quite, you know, busy, you know, with Ian Percy really trying to push the development. So we were getting, you know, pulled at both arms. And, you know, I think Goobs and I, on reflection, will look at a silver medal and say that was pretty impressive considering what was going on in our lives at the time. And if we were to go back and do it again, would we do it differently, or could we even do it differently? Don't know. It definitely wasn't as enjoyable campaign for us, because we were always, you know, torn between got to dedicate the hours to the 49er, can't, because if we do that, it's going to compromise the Artemis program. So I think Pete and Blair are probably maybe learning a bit more about what that's like now, with trying to defend the gold medal. You know, they both went and did the Volvo. You know, they want to defend the America's Cup. But, you know, I'm sure they're going to manage it just fine because they've got good teams and people around them. And now with the Olympics being pushed back a year, I guess their focus might be more on the Cup, and then they're going to have a 4-month period to get ready for the Olympics once the Cup's over.
Well, this jumps into my next question. It's a special guest question again, and it comes from a Randy Cunningham / Jody Shields at Wanji Wanji, God's Country is what he's written there. Can you please tell us about the story where the boat that went to London had an issue the day that was getting packed? Something got stuck.
Yeah, it's a good story. And he was heavily involved in saving our ass, basically. We would always launch our new 49ers in Australia. We generally, you know, get them all put together, send you a nice order for some Ronstan parts, get it on the boat, get it all ticked off, and go for a sail in Wanji. And this particular time, we would say normally pack the daggerboard cases with carpet, so the boards go up and down quite easily. And Julian Bethwaite said to us, actually, I really want to put some spar bond in there, or some, I forget what the material was, but basically he wanted to have it so it was a really snug fit, so no water could come up the case. And so he packed the bottom of the case for us, and we packed the top. Anyway, we launched the boat. Gooby does his usual jump on the centerboard, gets it down. We go for like an hour sail to commission the boat. Everything's working just fine. We go to come in, and he tries to pull it up, and it's stuck. And it turns out that the material that Julian used was a bit rubbery. And so when you pulled it up, it was fully stuck and wedged onto the board. And we tried, 2 of us pulling it up in the boat. We tried tipping it over and one pushing it from the other side. In the end, we had to carry the boat out on its side, the 2 of us, get it up onto the grass, got the sails down, the rig out on its side, got it upside down in its trolley, had a ratchet strap, trying to ratchet strap the thing out, got a rubber mallet, tried to tap it out, and split the bottom of the daggerboard apart. The reason why we were so desperate was it had to get in a container the next day to go to Europe to head off to some events over there. And so we managed to get it on the trailer fully loaded to go to the container packing the next day. Double trailer, boats on the roof, centerboard sticking out the roof. And Jody comes home from work, laying floorboards all day, and just looks at us, just laughs and just goes, "You jokers." And he comes over with a little Dremel and just Dremels all the way around the daggerboard. And he's like, "What's more important, the boat or the daggerboard?" And I'm like, "Well, they both are." And he's like, "Well, I'll try and just cut out." Anyway, took a fair bit of gel coat off the centerboard, and we eventually got the thing out. And he just said, "Oh, you can thank me later for that." And we just got this centerboard that needs a whole lot of repairs, and we've still got to pack the bottom of the case. But stories like that happen very often, but not many people see it. But when someone like Jody's involved, he wants the whole world to know how many times things like that happen to us. It wasn't the first time we've had to ask Jody for some assistance.
Oh, very good. It's a good story.
And it was the day we christened it. So my sister was there tipping champagne over the boat, and then she buggered off and came home a few hours later to see us just with the boat in bits. And she's like, "Oh, I guess it wasn't a lucky christening." But went on to win quite a few events, so it was good.
That's right. It ended up being quite a good christening. The NACRA 17 program, like as I said a bit earlier, agonisingly close. Come second at 2 Worlds. That's, pretty impressive performance considering you guys, new team, new boat, and it's a physical boat. Like, your poor sister, you made her do a lot of work.
Well, we were pretty happy with those results. We thought, second in the first Worlds and lost by a point.
You didn't even get to sail that race either.
Medal race was cancelled. It was quite light winds, and we were, pretty quick in the light wind at that event, and they cancelled it. So that was it was a bit disappointing, but I think we were also just surprised and stoked at how well we went. You know, the events before that, we were in the top 10, but never really in the mix at the front, and it all clicked that week. So that was awesome. And then, the World's just gone in Geelong. I like sailing in Geelong. It's a good flat water venue. We had lots of different conditions that week and unlocked a fair bit of speed that we knew was there, but we just never had a chance to dedicate enough time in the boat to really get to it. And that week we were quite rapid. And unfortunately, in the medal race, we had a nice points buffer, but we prioritised trying to secure Olympic selection over winning those Worlds. And I think, in hindsight, the mistake we made was, had we have just won the Worlds, then we probably would have got the Olympic selection anyway. So it's always hard, and I now understand what teams go through when it's close between a couple of teams. You take the British squad, are often got 2 or 3 good boats in a few classes, and you wonder why they don't win as many events throughout the quarters, because they're often thinking, what are the selectors going to think about my performance here? So Hayley and I had an awesome journey, and it was such a pleasure to sail with Hayley. She's such a good sailor in her own right, and a lot of respect for her to transition from helming a 49er, which is probably physically one of the easier jobs on the Olympic circuit physically, to crewing on a knacker, which I think is the hardest physically. And she, suffered a few injuries from some of the brutal crashes that we had throughout the campaign, but also just the load of the spinnaker sheet and the main sheet, really is tough on anyone, And I learned very quickly I'm not the best crew. I might be a bit heavier and stronger than Hayley, but I went into body preservation and took the easy seat in the boat, and she took it on, and she had a great time. And it was, I think what really would have been happy for us is if we had have won a Worlds, even with no Olympic selection, to know that we could become world champion would have been a really good end to that chapter. But we again left with 1 point off winning, and that was pretty tough for us to take, I think. And then a week later to find out we weren't selected was even tougher. But you live and learn sometimes.
Does it leave the flame burning? Does it make it we need to come back and really close off that chapter?
I think had we have won the Worlds, we probably would have been happy with our time in the class. Obviously the reason why you start an Olympic class is to go to the Olympics to win Olympic medals. And I've obviously been there and done that, and I'm, like many top Olympic sailors, have that desire to continue that for as long as you can. You take someone like Santi Lang, he's in his 50s and he's still doing it. So age isn't really the issue. It's about how much do we want to do it together, and if it's going to be viable for us to start another campaign for another quad. Right now we're in the process of doing probably what you call a bit more of a formal debrief, with the two of us and the coaching staff and AST, and work out what we would do differently, what we did right, what we did wrong, and what will it take to win, and are we able to achieve that? Because there's no point starting another campaign if you're already answering a few of your questions saying, well, we can't do this or we can't do that because of other factors. You've got a young kid, I've got a young, it changes your life a bit and how much free time you've got. And so, yes, there's always desire there. I think Hayley and I have a lot of shared desire that we would have loved to have finished the NACRA campaign off better. And so are we going to do it again? I at this point, I don't know. I think by the time we get around to this summer over Christmas, we'll need to make our decision. We can't sort of delay it much longer than that. So we're just trying to see how the whole world plays out right now and what we're looking at for Paris.
Let's let everyone keep guessing. So
how was that about answer?
No, it was a good answer. It was fine. Let's move on to Moths. Now, it's a very intriguing class. I've jumped into it because I've always looked at from an outsider looking and going, oh, they look amazing. They look bloody hard, which they are. Yep. why the Moth, and what makes all the world best sailors keep coming back to this class? You got yourself, you got Sling, you got Goobs, TB, Paul Goodison, all these guys just keep. It's like a moth to a flame, if you want to say it that way.
It is. I think I got involved in the class in 2008. So, what was that 12 years ago? And the first day I sailed it, I just thought this thing is this the coolest boat. It's so light, to start with. It's fast. It's super maneuverable. There's a lot of tech involved in terms of how you develop the boat. And the one thing I really like about the boat is that, yeah, you got to be physically fit, and what you do with your body and your skills is important, but you can also set the boat up to make your life nice and easy, or you can set the boat up to be really fast or really maneuverable. And if you have time available, which, a lot of us did in our 20s, it was quite a lot of fun to tinker with the boat, test different control systems, test your sails. Like it's an open development class at a budget that was affordable. I don't think it's as affordable now as what it was when I began. Like my first boat cost me $17,000 Australian dollars. That was when Mach 2 was really sort of coming into its own, and there weren't any other real competitive builders. It's obviously transitioned now. There's lots of builders, and so naturally when there's competition, prices sort of go up. You'd think they'd come down to keep them competitive, but they are quite high. And now multiple sets of foils, multiple sets of rigs, deck sweepers, the whole works is coming to play. And it's pretty exciting what happens with that development. But I think personally what I like the most is that it's a small, simple boat, yet complicated enough that it's a real challenge. And you can sail it on your own without having to race others and get a lot of satisfaction out of it. But when you do start racing with other people and you find all these incremental gains with your setup, it's really cool. And there's not many other classes out there right now that you can do that with. That is also, small enough that you can put it in your shed at home. Just lift it on your shoulder and carry it into the water. It's an awesome boat. I haven't done much racing in them of late, but I still have one. You can probably see I've still got one sitting there in the backyard for a rainy day. And it's a type of boat that I think you can also sail at various different levels. You don't have to be trying to win to have a good time. You've sailed it. Well, what do you think? Why do you love it so much? How's it different, say, from like an A class?
How does it different from an A class? It's not as big and it's easier to store. That's for one. I don't know. I've said to a few people, like I've been definitely been quicker on my A class than I have been on my Moth, but I feel like I'm going quicker on my Moth than I am on my A, and that's just because I'm not at the level yet to be able to send it as quick as the A. I'm not saying the Moth is slower, but it's just you're always on the go, and you're always something exciting is about to happen. So, whereas sometimes the A can be a little bit mundane in certain conditions that you're not up and foiling and stuff, whereas the Moth is just rapid all the time.
The Moth is a real challenge, isn't it? From the moment you sort of carry it to the water, the thing's alive, it's sort of floating on your shoulders.
That's the hardest part.
Yeah, and there's some good. I've had to do plenty of self-rescuing on the Moth, because it's a fragile piece of equipment. So you do have to think about how you're going to get home if stuff breaks, or how do you, like my life jacket has a quiver of toys and ropes and string every time I go, because there's little bits and pieces that might break. So if you're into tinkering on boats and you got plenty of free time and don't mind spending a bit of money on your sailing, it's a great boat. But having said that, you can get a really good second-hand boat for quarter the price of the top guys and have races within your own either skill level or budget as well. So
I don't want to put anyone off, but the ratio is probably 100 to 4 hours boat work to sailing at the moment.
Well, that's the thing about it, is that the boat work can be as much or as little as you want it to be. And if you love tinkering then you can always improve parts of the boat. So you can make your ratio grow and shrink. It's never going to be a laser, let's be honest. It's never going to be like a simple boat. The moment you start foiling, you have to be committed to looking after your equipment. Like I've just started to get involved in foiling windsurfing here in New Zealand. The new Olympic class is taking off around the world with the IQ, and there's a good fleet actually at a yacht club that's literally a kilometre down the road. So of course there's not a big moth fleet here. I've sort of been dragged across to the foiling windsurfing, and for me I'm like, oh, this is awesome, this is simple. There's no ropes, strings, it's just the foil, the board, the sail, off you go. But you find even in that, once you get your basics right, you start tweaking with your batten tension, or you start tweaking with how you adjust the outhaul, or the angles of your foils. Sailors just love doing that. The top sailors just love tinkering with whatever is at their disposal. But yeah, the smaller the equipment is, the easier it is to store, the better.
I last thing on the Moth from me is just that I think it takes your sailing to the next level, because you really have to be precise in your maneuvers to get it through the jibe, to get it through the tack. So when you do go back to another class, and as you have been quite the boat lover, you've been to every class I reckon there is to man, you're just better. So whether I go back to an A class or I go something else, I feel that if once I do go back to that part, or if I do go back to that thing, I will be a better sailor again. Well,
that's one of the reasons why during the quad and the lead up to London, I sailed the Moth so much. I sailed it, to develop my skills and my knowledge of the sport. And, I went to a couple of world championships during that period, and encouraged the likes of Goobs and Tom and even Pete Burling to come and join the fleet. And the one thing we all said to each other is that because the boats go so fast, you have to really think quickly, with your decision making. Okay, I need to duck that boat, or I need to tack on that shift. And if you think about it for too long, the moment is now gone, and then someone else takes it, and then you're now behind. So when I went back into the 49er fleet, it was like sailing in slow motion. And it's like, okay, I need to make a decision. And you're like, hang on a second, I've got a bit more time that I'm used to having because of my Moth sailing. So now I can plot and plan things a bit better in the 49er. And because Goobs also sailed the Moth, his headspace was in the same spot as, oh no, we've got plenty of time to make the decision. Even though normally it feels like you're rushed in a 49er in some moments, we'd like see it and we're like, oh no, we've got some time and we could have a little chat and then execute. And you imagine what it's like for Slingsby going back to his laser. He would have had all the time. So, and we all agreed that, that part of Moth sailing is really helpful. So then when I got involved in the America's Cup World Series sailing, it was like, okay, this kind of pace is similar to what I'm used to, so I don't feel overwhelmed. And that's why the top sailors keep going back to the Moth, because it keeps their skills sharp and fresh. And it's something they can have in their backyard, as opposed to having to rely on a big team and a huge budget to keep developing their own sailing. Like SailGP now, we don't race very often, particularly now with the world as it is. But last year we only did 5 sort of weekends racing. So if you wanted to show up ready to go, what would you do? Well, Tom had a Moth, I had a Moth, I had a Nacra. Like all the guys were trying to sail. Dylan, was heavily in Moths, Chris Draper, all, Rome has a Moth. Like everyone realized that if they want to be ready for the professional sailing in SailGP or the America's Cup, they need to have their own little, go-kart, as you wish. Like I'm sure all the F1 drivers would love to drive an F1 car every weekend. They can't, so they probably have all their go-karts on their own tracks, and that's how they keep their skills sharp.
I think we've just boosted the Moth fleet. Everyone that wants to go to the Olympics is going to get one now, because they're going to need to have that go fast mode, and then when they go back to their slower boats, can go in slow-mo. So let's go.
The Olympics had the Moth as a class.
Oh God, I don't want to imagine. It'd be $1 million campaign.
Well, if they were to do it, and we're not world sailing, but let's pretend we are for a second, you'd have to make it some form of one design to cost control. And I would like to think they wouldn't do your standard windward leewards. They'd do some kind of slalom style racing, heats and stuff like that. Like the snowboard cross. That's what I think. Well, I know we're sidetracked here, but I think if you're looking at how the Olympics is all set up, you've got to have some medals allocated to a different time of race format. So you can have your traditional boats doing your traditional racing, say your skiffs and NACRA, say, doing your shorter windward leewards, and then the foiling boats all doing these other style of races. I think then you start to get media interest in the sport, and you don't lose the traditional aspect.
It's probably not far away. I mean, there's the Wasp, there's the Skeeter, there's a few of these boats that are coming out. They're a one design that, who knows?
Yep, well, that's what the IQ, I think, is going to be about at the Olympics. They're already trying to talk about what kind of format they're going to do, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to be your traditional windward leeward racing. They're going to be looking at slalom racing and knockout series, and I think it's cool. I think once you get your head around the fact that, your Olympic campaign isn't about how high, how best VMG you can make it up and downwind, and you've got to focus on other areas, I think it's good. Winter Sports has done that with their diversification into, your snowboard cross and things like that. I can't see why sailing can't do that.
No, very good point. So my next point is, I mean, who knows when the next Moth event is going to be? But are you gonna turn up again? Because surely you're not going to let Slingsby dominate the way he is at the moment. I mean, he was unbelievable at those Perth Worlds. The speeds that he was recording and what he was doing to that fleet was just phenomenal. Surely you're going to have to come back and have a say.
We all knew that the venue in Perth is quite windy, right? And I know how hard Tom can hike. As a human being, he's such an athlete, and he's quite a bit bigger than me. He's a good 10 kilos bigger. So for me, showing up there to try and race against Tom was always going to be to his advantage. The fact that I also was going to struggle to get there because it was starting a couple of days after the NACRA Worlds ended, sort of deflated my chances of going. But I have a Moth in the backyard, as I said. I like to keep my hand in the class. Love to go to another event. I've been to must be like 7 or 8 worlds now, but if you're going to do it, and if I'm going to do something, you want to do it properly. So you want to gear up to it properly with the right equipment, the right amount of training, and give yourself a really good chance of doing well. So it sounds like Garda's on the cards next year.
It's a pretty attractive option if we're allowed to go.
That's, you don't need much of an excuse to go to Lake Garda. So that's where the last Worlds I did was. If I can get myself organised enough, I'd love to go and do that. But
Nationals are at Sorrento?
Nationals at Sorrento. I don't know. Am I going to be allowed back into that country?
I'm sure you'll be at it. We'll get you a pass in, I'm sure.
But definitely will be doing another event at some point in the future before I get too old.
Now, you gave a fair bit of your secrets away on the Moth in a conjunction that you did with Ronstan. We did a Ronstan Outteridge with your brother as well, who did the filming for us, tutorial video. And even your coach that you had for the NACRA, Harry Miles, said that, geez, you shouldn't have given those secrets away, because I learned a heap from that. And even he's now a top 10 world Moth sailor. So,
well, I think the goal with that was to make it easier for people to get in. Like when we were talking with Ronstan, they were like saying, "Can you guys, put together a bit of a how to Moth sort of sail?" And I said, "Well, what are we looking at? What kind of information?" And they're like, the basics like tacking and jibing, but I went a bit more basic with some things like how do you rig the thing? Because that's often a question, what's the best way to get the sail up without trashing your sail on the boat, So we went through that process, and then we actually filmed it all in Hailing Island during the Worlds. There was a race day that got cancelled because there was no wind, but there was just a little puff that came in, wind against current. So my brother could actually film it all from land, and we just put some GoPros all over the boat, and just really wanted to try and talk through the basics of jibing and tacking and straight line sailing and taking off and things like that. And it was actually a really fun exercise to do, because you don't I think when you're trying to explain something to people, you've really got to test how much you understand the fundamentals of the boat. And it got me to realize, that I am quite methodical where I put my feet in tacking and jibing. And if my foot placement isn't quite spot on, the maneuver is not going to be as good. So being able to break it all down, I thought, well, this is actually going to be so useful for so many people. Yes, there was some secrets given away, but it wasn't like you're never going to win a worlds based off what I gave out there. It's like, it's just improving the overall enjoyment for a Moth sailor so that they can get better quicker.
And I always go from the belief that if you can make your opposition quicker, you're only going to make yourself quicker. And if you can help advance the class, then you're only going to get yourself better. So,
100% right, and that's how I've always operated, whether it was in the Moth class with, the likes of Joe Turner and Tom and Goobs that we did a lot of training with, or Savos when I was a young kid, or 49ers. You pick your group that you train with and you openly share everything that you know. And that's the way to get better. And if you think that by sharing information to someone else means that they're going to beat you, then you've just got to try harder and you've got to work harder so that isn't the reason. And, we worked really closely with Pete and Blair in the 49 on the lead up to London, knowing that they were going to be the toughest competition to beat. But we knew the faster they were, the faster we'd be, the less we have to worry about everyone else. And that's sort of the ultimate goal.
Well, if you haven't seen these Moth tutorial videos, even if you don't sail a Moth, I'm guarantee you're going to learn something out of it. Jump onto the Ronstan YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button so that you get all these interviews that I'm currently doing with all the world superstars of sailing, and keep up to date with everything Ronstan. So we'll move on to the last topic, is the future. What's next for Nathan Outteridge? You said that you're doing a bit of foil boarding. You kind of in the the middle of deciding what's next for yourself. So do you have any idea?
Honestly, right now, with the way the world is sitting, I don't really know. Like I still have contract with SailGP, which I'm very happy to be a part of, and I'm looking forward to the season kicking off next year. But that's going to kick off in April, so it's still 9 months away. We're pretty, from a family perspective, pretty set up here in Auckland at the moment, and enjoying a bit of family life. The last decade's been a bit full on, to be honest. So it's nice to spend some time with Em and Jack and hanging out at home. And my first winter since 2005, so 15 years since I've been this cold. Although,
suffer.
Although sometimes going to Weymouth in June can be quite cold as well. But yeah, and then as I was saying, I'm getting into these foiling board sports. So I've got a foiling windsurfer. And the reason why I did that was that it's a new challenge, a new skill. Done heaps of foiling on the Moth, done a lot of foiling on bigger boats with electronic control systems, but foiling with your feet and your balance that, is required for that is really cool. I've got one of those little handheld wings with a surf foil. Get out on that when it's windy. I was out yesterday actually in a quite a big storm here. We had hail and all sorts of stuff. It was like 8 degrees, and that's winter, but man, it was fun. It's so cool getting out on any form of sort of foiling equipment. So that's keeping me kind of satisfied, if you know what I mean. I'm not getting any racing at all this year. And so hopefully by the end of this year, I can assess what the Olympic sort of scene looks like, and if that's going to be something of interest, whether it's in the NACRA or whether there's an option to go back into a 49er, or whether I actually find out that I can foil windsurf half decent and do that, I don't know. But there's just, it's a good time, I think, in life to assess some options, which is what we're going to do. We recently bought a cruising boat here. So Em comes from a big cruising family. Her dad sort of owned cruising boats most of his life, and we thought, well, while the world's a bit locked down and we can't travel overseas, we'll buy a boat and do a bit of family cruising. So that's...
What'd you get?
Got a Jeanneau 349.
Okay.
Nice little 33-footer, 2 cabins, so enough to take the family, but not enough to have the whole family, extended family, come and stay on board. My decided he's looking forward to coming over when the borders open up and taking the boat for a sail with me.
Yes.
So, yeah, just sort of taking it easy at the moment, looking around, and it's quite weird. And you know you're missing out, but you also know you're not, because no one else is really doing a whole lot right now. But basically plotting and planning for what next year and beyond looks like at the moment.
Okay, this brings me down to my last question: is advice for young sailors, like the next Nathan Outteridge. What would you tell them now to going forward?
I think the biggest advice and the thing that I look back on the most when I was younger and, right through teenage years and into 20s is you've got to love what you're doing. And, if you're sailing and you're doing it week in and week out, you're obviously loving it. And, it's taking opportunities when they present themselves to you. And, so I was lucky and got a lot of opportunities. I got an opportunity to get into the Moth class quite early, took that on and ran with it, and wasn't afraid to ask a lot of questions of people around, for help and support. Got opportunities to go sailing on keel boats, which if you're a young sailor and you're, like going fast, a keel boat really isn't that exciting, but it's a great way to meet people in the industry. And it's a great way to sort of learn how to work in a team. And, did a lot of sailing on far 40s and Melges 32s in my 20s.
No Hobart yet.
No Hobart. I don't really like the offshore sailing. That's quite clear. But being involved in a larger team at a young age is really good, because if you do then get opportunities to be involved in cup teams and stuff like I did in the future, you already have an understanding that, the dynamic is quite different, and you prepare yourself for it that way. So, and I think the other big thing is that as one of the things I learned really sort of early on is that you've got to work with your competitors. As young days in Sabos, which transitioned to 20s and 29ers and flying 11s and all that, you have squads, and yes, your competition is like the enemy, but they're also, going to help you get better. So you help them, they help you. You develop a training partner relationship, but you develop really good friends that are going to last for a long time. And I've got friends all through Australia, all through New Zealand now, and all through the world of people that we've worked with really closely, and those friendships are going to last a long time.
No, I agree. I mean, yeah, if I had the same opportunity to say back to young Stephen, I'd say get on any boat you can. Don't get stuck in a class for too long. And but you can always go back, but, take any opportunity to get on any boat and learn other aspects of sailing.
Absolutely. And, everyone knows that boats aren't cheap, and owning multiple boats is
hard.
But, if you own, like, for example, when I sailed flying 11s, I owned one flying 11. And when I sailed a 29er, someone else owned the 29er. But you could sail the same boat together, and you'd find ways to work it out. And the same when we got into 470s and 420s. Aidan owned the 470, I owned the 420, parents that is, and you could share your assets that way. But if someone says, hey, you want to come for a ride on an 18-footer this weekend, say yes. Don't say
exactly.
Just don't say, oh, I don't know if I'm up to that level. Who cares? Just go and do it. If someone says, do you want to come out on the rib and watch me go moth sailing, and you can jump on for 20 minutes. Yes, of
go.
Course. Do it. And while you're there, be a sponge, ask questions, and people, as you've seen from our chat today, they're very willing to share information and talk about things they're passionate about. We're not, some of the top sailors in Australia aren't scary people. They're happy to share. If you've ever met Glenn Ashby, it's really hard to keep his mouth shut. We just yabber on for ages, and to the point where the battery on my computer is probably going to die soon if we go much longer.
Yes, no, we'll wrap it up here. You're an absolute gentleman of the sport, a gentleman overall. I appreciate you coming on board. You got lucky today. I was going to put the background of the results from the last Nationals at the Wanji, where I just got you on the last day, but I thought I'll be nice to him. I won't do that.
No, that shows we're all human, and on any given day, you can outsail me. So I look forward.
No, it was a battle royale. We had a good last day, but I got you.
It was, but I am looking forward to when we line up in the Moths together.
Oh God, no. I'll be on the 4th page.
Do I get points for lapping?
No, you do not.
Oh.
So, all right. I really appreciate having this chat, and we'll speak soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.